What is going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 124 of the Hideout, where we will be chatting all things Web3 gaming and the Metaverse. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nick Frontera. I am one of the founders and the CEO of Apollo Entertainment, the company behind the Satoshiverse, the Legions 2029 game, and this Hideout Spaces. We have a stacked panel today. I'm very excited to get into the questions, but before we do, we will jump into some introductions of our amazing guests. Before we do that, for those of you who don't know about the Satoshiverse, we've been building in the space since 2020. We started off as a comic book, superhero themed, blockchain themed collaboration with the infamous Jose Delbo, who at the age of 87, became definitely the oldest NFT artist in the space. But before that, he spent about 60 years working for Marvel and DC Comics, doing everything from Wonder Woman to the Beatles' Yellow Submarine comic books, and then went and finished his career and his life spending 3 years in the NFT space, creating some wonderful art that led us to create this project. Now we have been building a game called Legions 2029 for the past 4 years. It is available in alpha to the community for free. We have a ton of contests and things going on. I won't go too deep into it because the pinned tweet at the top of the spaces has videos and pictures and all the information you need to know. Now is a great time to jump in. We've been announcing some big things in the last couple weeks and have some other big things that are coming up that I can't get into too much, but some really cool stuff is coming. So a great time to join the community, and it's all free. So check it out. Definitely encourage you to do so, as well as to follow and check out all the other amazing projects we are going to have on these spaces. So before we get into introductions, what I'll do is I'll call on you guys. Feel free to tell us anything we need to know about the projects. We love to see illustrated stuff, so feel free to post whatever you want at the top of the spaces. That will help people learn more about the project. And let's start with some quick introductions. Why don't we start with Kevin from Alien Worlds? Welcome to the spaces.
Hey, thanks for having me. Hey, everybody, I'm Kevin Rose, and I'm Chief Marketing Officer of Decoko. We're the publisher behind Alien Worlds. And quick before I get started, I just want to thank M Arts out there for requesting that I come back. I've been on a couple times, but I heard that you wanted us here, and so here we are. You asked, we deliver. I have been working in marketing for 15 years. I have been working in blockchain for almost half that time, which I think in normal working years is probably twice as long. One blockchain year is every like 5 years. And I've been a gamer for about 30. And Alien World is a sci-fi based metaverse where anything the Trillium token and the NFTs touch is part of that metaverse. And right now we are focused on building out a ton of games across different genres and different platforms, from Steam, iOS, and Android, even to Ultra, the Web3 gaming store. And we built our sci-fi IP in collaboration with Kevin J. Anderson, who co-wrote the Dune prequels, was a producer on the movie, and has 25 million books in print to his name, besides winning numerous awards. So love sci-fi, love gaming, love this community. Happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Kevin, and glad M-Arts put you back in touch and got you back on here. He's one of our beloved community members as well. So definitely excited to have you guys back on. Let's jump over to Chaspa. Welcome to the spaces.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think this is the first time that we are in this space, and I'm very happy for that. My name is Aaron. I'm the co-founder of Chaspa. So Chaspa is a Web2 and Web3 gaming community. We have a lot of players. Most of our players are from Southeast Asia, and right now we are focusing more on bridging our Web2 community in the Web3 space. So yeah, it takes time, but it's worth it. So looking forward for this space. Thank you so much.
I love it. And one thing we certainly need in this space is players. So always love to get the players and the community perspective. It's always, important to hear not just from the developers, but the people actually consuming these games. So lovely to have you on. Let's jump over to Arena Z. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jay. I'm from Arena G. I'm an operation lead here. Arena G is basically a gaming platform to provide A to Z solution, hence the Arena Z, to the gamers and builders to bridge the gap between the two groups, to expand Web3 gaming ecosystem, to include all the gamers that not just from the Web3 part, but also from the traditional gaming world, and also the builders from both traditional world and the Web3 spaces. So I'm also here with one of our biggest partner, the New Order, who is listening here on the Hideout. TNO is a third-person shooter that we've been working on as a partner, and it has successfully finished the playtest before. And during the playtest, I believe we also did the Hideout with you. So really glad to be here back again. So thank you for having me here.
Amazing. Well, it's definitely great to have you back on, and we are definitely fans of what you guys are building at TNO. So can't wait to get into it. Let's go over to, I think we have Felipe still at Echoes of Cryptalia. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, guys. My name is Felipe Millan. I'm the co-founder and a creative director of Open Sky Games, and we are currently working in Echoes of Cryptalia, which is a multi-mode JRPG. We are a studio mostly focused in fun, or one of our biggest takeaways is that the only way for Web3 to compete in the Web2 market before the great audiences is to create simple, fun games for people to enjoy. And it doesn't really matter. People are somewhat upset sometimes with like AAA graphics or I don't know, that kind of stuff. We believe that we have to design fun games to be able to compete, and those games have to take a particular advantage from blockchain that integrates the technology in a way that's perfectly seamless for Web2 players, but also generates desirable interactions within the blockchain itself. And that's where our thesis comes out. It's called gamified staking, which basically integrates the tokenomics of the project inside the core loop of the game itself in a way that aligns the incentive of every player towards a high TVL. So we're basically creating a game that we have economically designed to allow us to completely focus on fun. So I guess we will have the opportunity to talk a little more about that. I'm very happy to be here, and thanks for welcoming.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely agree that these games need to be fun and, focus on the value proposition of blockchain rather than the buzzwords and all the fun that we've been focusing on for the last few years, right? The time has come to, make blockchain invisible, and to get that value prop, like you said, out of it without necessarily having it be too in your face. So definitely excited to dive in more on what you guys are building and the staking that you were discussing. But before we do, let's see. Do I have Spencer on stage? I do. There he is. Spencer, take it away.
What is going on, everyone? My name is Spencer. I am the business development manager here with Satoshiverse and Apollo Entertainment. Excited to be here today. I will be asking all of the questions and moving the conversation forward here for all you today. So before we start out on the questions, wanted to get into a few housekeeping items. So first thing I want to do is pin a tweet to the top of the space, which I have just done. So we do a giveaway every week on the Hideout. This week we are giving away 5 Satoshi's crystals, which is one of the main in-game resources within our game Legions 2029. You need that basically to upgrade all of your in-game resources, like your avatars and your weapons and your skins. So something that you definitely want to have in your account if you're playing the game. So in order to win those 5 Satoshi's crystals, all you have to do is stick around until the end of the space when we choose a winner. So if you're listening now, don't go anywhere, and you'll be here and have a chance to win. In terms of the questions today, for the format of the space, we are going to start out with a group discussion question. I will call on someone to start, and then from there, feel free to just jump into the conversation from there. No need to raise hands or anything like that. Then we'll get into some individual questions for each of you guys, and if we have time at the end, then we will do some more group discussion questions. So without further ado, let's get into the first question. And let's see, why don't we have Kevin start us out on this one? So how can we design sustainable player-driven economies in Web3 games?
Okay, that's not a small question. I don't know that it needs to be very different than the way it works today. But if you're talking about player-driven economies, I think what you're talking about are specific genres of gaming. Um, so think of it this way. Cryptocurrency, NFTs, blockchain doesn't work with every type of game that exists. That's my opinion. Um, if someone said they were releasing a card game, like a playing card game, like Jacks, Queens, Aces, you would say, and they were using blockchain, you'd be like, that doesn't make any sense. Tetris, why do I need blockchain for Tetris? I think that for that statement to be true, player-driven economy is more tied to the genre of game than we probably think about it normally. I think the best example of a game that could be quintessentially blockchain would be something like Eve Online, which has been called a spreadsheet game. You know, it is very economically driven, very resource driven, massive organizations, governance challenges to tackle. The things that blockchain provides, such as immutable transactions, transparency in governance, and the ability to swap governance out seamlessly in things like a DAO, would be perfect for a game like that. So what you're asking is a really complicated question, but I think the first way to start to answer it is to say, is this even the right genre? Does it have does it have some of these things that blockchain already solves at a basic layer present in it so that they can work well together? Otherwise, you're just trying to shove it into a game that simply doesn't need it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that that it is very dependent on genre, not just, whether blockchain provides value, but how it provides value, right? I think in theory, one could say, well, maybe you're creating a crypto gambling card game and you're using blockchain to drive, I don't know, tournament winnings or to decentralize custody of pools or whatever, or you're using ZK proofs to make sure that the gambling is fair. I guess there's probably ways that blockchain can be integrated into different types of games. But I think when we're talking about player economies, which was what the question was on, and what I think you were touching on, I think that it really is genre dependent, and I think that as a general principle, um, when we start to think about games that already exist, that have been designed without blockchain in mind, I think the big question is, does the game consider real money mechanics already? And are those real money mechanics integrated into the game either officially or unofficially through some sort of seamless UI? And what I mean by that, right, can players already buy and sell and transfer elements of the game? Because that is kind of the core, I think, beyond governance. And I think that's another important one. I think the core value proposition of blockchain is ownerability and transferability of in-game assets. And I think that applying it to games that wasn't part of the design is very difficult. So I think it's very important when designing a player economy or the game economy to know ahead of time you're building a game that's going to have real money transactions.
Can I add something? You made me think of a good point, and I think this is going to be controversial, but I think to have a flourishing game economy, not to mention a player-driven game economy, you probably cannot have a volatile, free-floating currency in that game. I think that over the past, 10 plus years that we've seen Bitcoin skyrocket in relative to value to major global currencies, we've got it in our mind that the same type of appreciative trajectory is the path that we all need to take. But video games are not investments, and um, you're we're if we're going to create a class of like wealthy elite in video games, we might as well just all pack up and give it up and go home now. So I think that primarily the game driven economies or the player driven economy side is tied to um, like something that resembles the modding community, being able to create custom assets or create custom episodes within larger games that can be sold in terms of access, like those, certain items and their scarcity, that value will fluctuate. But otherwise, currencies or tokenized currencies within games should be relatively stable, because otherwise you're not thinking about it like a game anymore. You're thinking about it like a financial asset. And those two things are not compatible, in my opinion. In Alien Worlds, we actually have Trillium, which is a kind of a free floating asset, a fungible token that goes up and down and can go up and down wildly in value based on trading activity. That is more of a meta currency. It's not actually applicable to any particular game. In the different games that we are developing, they have their own economies. Trillium can be used to purchase items across those different games, but so I think that we need to dispel some of the sort of traditional crypto notions of speculation in favor of stability for any video game to really have a chance. Otherwise, you're going to alienate every player that comes after a certain point, because you can't go up forever. Nothing ever does. And you were not going to grow.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that point more. It's interesting you're saying that. 2 weeks ago, we announced that we were releasing our in-game soft currency bits, and we've been kind of experimenting with the idea, exactly what you said. This idea that there are serious, scalability problems when you introduce a premium currency that's volatile and dependent on market conditions into in-game dynamics of a player economy. So what we actually did with bits, the Satoshiverse doesn't have a premium currency currently, but what we did with bits is we essentially modified the ERC20 standard and put in transfer restrictions that do not let it's an ERC20 token, but it can't travel outside of the ecosystem. Its use is limited to contracts that are within the ecosystem. And so what we've done is we've paired that with NFT liquidity pools. So all of our in-game resources can be traded via liquidity pools. And so what we were able to do is decouple the speculation that comes with cryptocurrencies, but still have the ability to implement, a soft currency like gold in World of Warcraft or RuneScape. And I mean, it's still, very new, very young. We're still trying to figure out all the things that are wrong with it and kind of analyze data. But, our thesis is exactly aligned with yours. that if the player economies, the games themselves need their own scalable economies. You need to have a no cap, not limited, non-scarce, infinitely scalable, if you're going to have a currency, soft currency within the game. I guess our thesis is that you can do that with kind of the tech stack that we've been building. But I think that, generally speaking, you want to detach that from a premium currency. And our view, like yours, is to kind of create an ecosystem of games. And so our vision for that is, you can have several of these, what we're calling semi-soulbound tokens, all eventually paired with a premium currency that allows, inflows and outflows, but using bonding curves that are scalable. So yeah, I mean, if that's an interesting topic, we should definitely talk after, because we've definitely been playing with that exact point for the last year and working on a few tech
As,
solutions.
lo- as, as, as long as you're not saying the words bonding curve ever
Yeah.
to your players, you know,
Yeah.
it
No,
might
I
be
agree.
fine.
And I think one of the interesting things about this is when you start putting things on liquidity pools peer to peer or eliminating peer to peer, you can do a lot from a UI perspective to make the experience seamless and more abstracted for the user. So, for example, we're working on a Web2 version of the game that we're working on for Steam. That version of the game is going to mirror the entire player economy of our Web3 version, but with single button click buy and sells of everything within the game, because we're able to index all the values from our different curves and then reflect a parallel economy within the game. So I agree with you. I mean, you don't want to go into the weeds of the tech, right? But I think that there are certain things in games that we've almost made harder on ourselves by using certain aspects of blockchain that aren't necessarily, may have been good for PFP NFTs, but may not be great for the scalability of high volume and high transaction games. I definitely want to invite the other speakers to jump in on this topic, though. What do you guys think?
Well, it's. I was laughing a little because you basically created a hard soft currency. It's very interesting, the design also. I think it's pretty smart to because I believe that one of the great things that blockchain has on its favor in this kind of asset management aspect of the games is that it's very good at bookkeeping, at knowing who has what and in which distribution and what should be like the relative worth of something. And the issue with soft currencies in blockchain ecosystems is that it kind of dispels this information to the player. For the player, of course, that is actually interested in the Web3 aspect, and for the player who is not, he's absolutely used to seeing all kinds of soft currency in every single game they play. So it's not a problem. I very much agree with you that it also depends on how are you making a user interface that reflects a certain intuitiveness behind the design you are proposing. We have done a little about this stuff. I will surely talk about this later when we talk about the game. But I think it's a great idea in general. I think that it should behave economically very similarly as a soft currency. So I don't think it's a big issue. But of course it would have to be tested in the battlefield. And I also about what Kevin said, it's very strange. It feels very strange to me that we all three agree perfectly on what Kevin said, but I think that we all feel like we are in the minority. In every space I go, every place I speak, I start the same as Kevin, saying like, maybe I'm going to say something controversial. And I think that it's great that there's a group of people that's growing, that's making the same realization that there needs to be a change of focus in how we are designing Web3 games. We are not designing financial tools I understand that this was like the first instinct of Web3 games in the what we could call, quote unquote, the 2021 Axie era, when it was the very beginning. But that's because Axie was forced to compete with a space full of financial tools, and that's not where we are any longer. We are in a place where blockchain ecosystem have become more complex, that we are incorporating value funnels such as real world assets and so on. We're integrating with the outside economy, whatever you want to call it, and that needs a diminish of volatility. I very much agree with that. People don't like volatility. It's just open the newspaper and see them complain about inflation and so on. Volatility is a very big problem for regular people. Although it gives strong opportunities when you are speculating. But I very much agree with these points, and I think that my main takeaway of what Kevin said, apart that I very much agree with you both, and that we have our own thesis, is that I'm glad to see that more people are taking these kind of stances towards game design.
Yeah, I think there may be a correlation between projects that we're building focused on purely financial games and them not speaking on spaces too much anymore. I think the last couple of years have been pretty harsh on a lot of models that didn't end up working out. But whether it's here every week, talking to some of the innovative builders, I really get, or going to conferences and whatnot. I really get the impression when I speak to builders that we're not in the minority anymore. That this is the new meta that's emerging, kind of sustainable implementations of blockchain technology, and we're starting to finally see kind of a move towards what I think will be the future of digital asset ownership and kind of these different mechanisms getting back-ended and made invisible within games, and really NFTs and blockchain as a technology rather than as the key talking point for a game. So I'm glad we're moving in that direction. We were definitely in the minority in 2020 and 2021 when we were yelling about play to earn isn't going to work, but I think things are starting to go in that direction. Chaspa or Arena Z, do you want to comment on this idea of creating sustainable player economies?
Well, I kind of have a interesting change of view about this whole designing the ecosystem. Is that we are originated from the game called League of Kingdoms, which has been operating for more than, or actually reaching 5 year next month. So, and what I learned is that I originally thought that designing some like cool economics with all the tokenomics and NFTs and contracts ready for the long vision is really important. But as I've been working here longer and longer, I realized that it is also important that you actually need to adapt to the changes that you made to the game and also to the whole ecosystem and the market and everything. Like, for example, game itself is never really a stable thing. It always adapts. All the players changes, the game changes. There's new content, new meta, and in that changes, the tokenomics and the whole economy cannot stay the same as well. So we need to find ways to adapt. I think we're still in the middle of the road to find find ways to change and adapt. But I believe it was quite an interesting change of mind for myself and wanted to share it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been. I've definitely, our game definitely isn't the kind of the typical play to earn structure, and so we both, for better or for worse, don't really deal with these issues as much. But I've been parts of ecosystems kind of over the years where we've seen how the real money and kind of financialization element of these game ecosystems has affected the games, and I think like what you're saying is true. Not only do you have to shift the tokenomics models and kind of the blockchain aspects based on the way the game evolves. But I think, and this may be wrong, and I'd be curious to know whether, some of the other, maybe Kevin, you have an opinion on this, or some of the other speakers who have had kind of more large user bases and kind of had a token integrated for a while. One thing that, we've seen, or I've seen in a lot of projects, are kind of this like quite a few, farmers. We have a bot issue with so many projects that are successful. It's almost like a necessary, part of the business if you run a successful game that has an earning element to it. You get kind of this excitement, I think, from certain markets that are very focused on extracting. And I think that focus on extraction, not to knock it at all, but I think the focus on extraction makes it even harder to develop that player economy that, it should really be balanced within the game, but ultimately sometimes gets very focused on the extractive element. I'm wondering, from your guys' experience on this, how do you curb that? How do you deal with these elements of whether it be bots, whether it be farmers, but people who are less focused on playing the game and participating and more focused on extracting value?
Botting is a consequence of game design. Blockchain cannot properly account for identity. It can account for history, but not uniqueness, especially in layer ones where the cost to create a new identity, as far as the blockchain is concerned, is near zero. So the answer for how to combat botting for games that are susceptible to it is a game of whack-a-mole. You develop complex strategies to identify patterns of different accounts that are engaging in things that you objectively or subjectively decide are not okay. And that is difficult and is forever. But the answer, I think the bigger answer is that the game the meta for playing the game should not include botting. And so it's diversification. So in Alien Worlds, we started off with mining, and mining does reward botting because it is the more addresses, the more accounts you have attempting to mine, the more trillium, that you can reap. So the answer is to create games that bots can't play. But that's not the leading design principle. It's, create games that people want to play. And so bots don't as a consequence. Otherwise, I think the genre of game you're talking about is now, has been, and forever will be, play to earn, susceptible to bots because that's the meta strat. Period. So to create other games that leverage the digital assets that you began with, but with gameplay that is prioritizing the human over the machine.
No, I love that. That makes a ton of sense. And, I think that goes to the core of some of the issues here, right? What is the value being created by the games? What is extracting versus, I'm not going to name the game, but I've been playing a game that I really love playing for certain reasons, but I know there's an entire community of players who are only playing that game to make money. And it's not a lot of money, but it's a little bit of money. And I think that, unfortunately, in games where, there is a UGC element and part of the game, there's different metas within the game. Some metas affect other metas, right? So if I'm designing a quest or building a build or doing something, that may, for me, be directed towards, the players within that game, there may be players who don't care at all about that. They're just going to, farm or do whatever that meta is. And so I think, this is still a challenge again when it's so easy to, convert money to, or in-game assets to money, or the more liquid a game is or a currency is, usually the more bots we're going to see. But I agree. I mean, I think what you nailed it's you got to create experiences that humans want to play, and it's hard for bots to play. I've seen some instances of kind of leaning into the bot meta as well, enabling, essentially creating things that could be farmed, but farming is essentially part of the game and you don't need a human element. I've seen, there's been a couple of projects that have come on here and basically said, well, you have a bot as part of the game, so you just turn it
I
on
mean,
when
you
you're not
could
playing.
design the whole game around that. I mean, it could, the name of the game, like the brand and of the game matters, right? If you were to say, this is called Bot Simulator, people would play it and that would be what it's for, and everyone would be okay with it because that was the expectation that you set up in the beginning. The problem is I don't blame any game systems, metaverses, whatever. It's not their fault for where we are, because when blockchain gaming started, it was just basically blockchain VCs grasping at the next thing. And if you are the head of an organization that is building a blockchain game, the cheapest audience to acquire was blockchain people, and the fastest way to raise money was from blockchain investors. And so you would cater to them. The problem is the longevity of that strategy was about 3 years ago. So if you were not able to see that, and if you weren't able to pivot to creating different games that people would actually want to play, you had a big problem. I don't think that this is all a consequence of people choosing the bad path. They felt forced into it because when you're a business owner, you have to make hard decisions, and that was the fastest way to get users and funding. But here we are.
Well, I don't think you've said anything on this spaces that I agree with more than what you just said. So I'll leave it at that. And, it has absolutely been a struggle, navigating that side of the space, and knowing, that some of the decisions that VCs might ask you to make, or hype might require, are not necessarily good for the long-term health of the project. And I think, again, there's projects that are still around that have been building for a long time, and I think a lot of them are the ones that didn't necessarily lean into that. So there's definitely some exceptions, but all in all, I think it's good to still see this new mentality emerging. Although I think a lot of people have felt that should have been the mentality from the beginning. So appreciate those words. Let's do this. Let's move on to the individual questions, because that was an awesome discussion, but we're running a little behind. So let's jump over there.
Sounds good. All right, so the first individual question is going to go to Felipe. So how does the stake and own loop in Echoes of Cryptalia change the way players progress compared to traditional spending models?
Okay, so this is a great question, also very related to what you guys were talking about these bot issues and stuff like that puts in danger the ability of players to be in charge of the economy as we started this the discussion of this segment. I just want to add to what Kevin is saying, and he's very right, is that this doesn't mean that you have to create hard games. Not at all. Like, for example, chess, it's a very bottable game. Now computers beat humans every day, but even Pokemon, if you think about Pokemon Red is actually a pretty hard game for a bot to play. So it's not even about how difficult you have to design. It simply has to have some certain human elements that the bot won't see, and it's a game design is the design of incentives. That's the real work behind it. So if you have a community that's focused on voting, then you have designed a game that rewards voting. It's just that simple. So I very much agree with what you are saying. What we mean about gamified staking and how and the stake and own loop that you talked about is our main strategy towards solving what we call the Web3 gaming token problem. This is a token that we have all seen it. It's very volatile. It usually is in a game that the game is built, and then the token is sprinkled on top of it a little bit. Like it's not really part of the game, but then the designers try to mingle some use for it, put it in the game. It does a couple of things, and the trajectory of the token typically crashes by the end. And we have seen this many times because it really has no firm ground to stand on. So when we started designing Echoes of Cryptalia, first of all, we decided that we wanted to make a Web3 game, because another thing that's very true that you say is that why Tetris doesn't need the blockchain. If you want to make a Tetris, don't go build a Tetris, but it doesn't make sense to force a game into blockchain. You have to think the game as one single structure, taking into account that it will live in the blockchain. So with this design principle, we have incorporated the tokenomics of our game directly inside of the core loop of the game. This means that whenever every player is taking game actions, simply playing the game, that interacts with the blockchain in a positive way. So the stake and own loop basically works like this, and it kind of solves this problem that I'm gonna explain through three different scenarios. Okay, so in a scenario A, you are playing an RPG. In everyone, in every scenario, you're playing an RPG. Okay, because we're talking about an RPG. So in a scenario A, you are playing a Web2 RPG, for example, I don't know, like Final Fantasy or Octopath, and you go to the store, and the store owner says you want a new sword, and you say I want to purchase the sword. The store owner says, okay, give me 1,000 gold. You give them 1,000 gold, and you continue your quest. This has no relevance for the game designer. Web2 games have no economies, and most of them have no economies designed behind it, or have economies that are making an optimization for a learning curve, for a certain difficulty level that the player has to advance through to complete the game. So let's move to the next scenario when we are this same interaction, but in the blockchain. So you're playing a blockchain game, you go to the store, and you want to buy something that costs 1,000 gold. This time the gold is token. And you buy it, you go continue your quest with your item. So what just happened there is basically nothing, because at first there was 1,000 copies of a token in the player's wallet. Now there's 1,000 copies of a token in the game's wallet, which is of no use for the game, because the game is not in the business of selling his own token. This will be madness from the game side. So basically, we have people tend to believe that this should be a good thing because it works in the real world. But in the real world, this change then in the real world, the store owner goes and buys bread, and the guy who makes the bread goes and buys something else, and that's why this generates a positive value for the economy. But this is not the case in Web3. So we basically are proposing that this scenario would become true, the scenario 3, which is our case, the Echoes of Cryptalia case, where a player goes into a store. It's not really a store, you're base building, and instead of charging you in token for the building you want, they tell you stake the token. So this might seem weird, like why why would the store owner want me to just stake the token, and just for having it there for a little time, I can have what I want? Well, the thing is that now something did happen. Now that the token is in a staking contract, it's out of circulation. This means that the total value locked of the game has gone up. And just by building a new building in the game while you're base building and performing these staking contracts with a seamless iteration that's called pre-approved transactions, where a player only signs a transaction at the beginning of the game session, and then they don't have to approve it every time they base build. Just by playing, just by progressing in the game, they are taking token out of circulation, and by doing so, pushing or creating a pressure. It doesn't really mean that the token will go up, but it creates a pressure in that direction. So the idea behind this is that it's a complete incentive alignment. Because if you have a Web3 gamer that's completely interested in min-maxing, then they will progress trying to make the buildings that generate the NFTs that then he will use to either to further advance and get to harder missions that reward him more, or eventually trade. In our game, you would eventually be able to be the guy who gets the best quality materials and become like the best blacksmith. You don't really have to be the best warrior. Not everyone has to be the best warrior. There's a lot of ways of playing the game. That's why we call it a multi-mode game. And in this stake and own loop, you are basically staking and receiving in exchange as quote unquote yield NFTs that are part of the game, that are playable in the game. In exchange of that, we as a game, we have a commitment to not sell items. Okay, we don't sell any kind of items. So we are making we're renouncing to the item economy in favor of making or incentivizing staking from part of the players. If the player is a Web2 player and doesn't really care about investing the ego here and there, they will simply see an energy bar, like it was electricity, in the top of their screen. So they will see this is the amount of our token, that's of the token of his ownership that they have used, and it's currently staked. This is the free amount of token, but represented as if it were like, I don't know, the amount of energy you have available for different activities in the game. And the player will behave in the exact same way of the Web3 players. They will base build if they want to progress, and they will only progress if the game is fun. So that forces the team to provide a fun game, which I think is a very good thing, because this might be weird to say, but there are some game design principles that make games actively worse, not just because of their presence, but because of the incentives they create to the game designers. One example of this is a selling experience. When you sell experience, you are incentivizing the game designer to create patches of the game that are very difficult to pass without buying extra experience. And this obviously leads to a worse game. How much will you make unsufferable this patch? It depends on the designer. There's one egregious example.
If I can interrupt for a second, that's only
Yeah,
because that's only if you choose to sell experience.
of course. I was meaning exactly that, because you have incorporated in the design of the game itself an incentive for the designer to make a worse gaming experience. That's why I completely agree with you. If it was not understood like that, I'm sorry. English is my second language, but I mean precisely that. Even when the designer is also playing a game, which is the design of designs. I don't know if it makes sense, but whenever you incorporate a design, you are also modeling your incentives, not only the players' incentives, but yours. Because if you decide to sell experience, you have that incentive, just as Kevin said. And this happens also with every different design aspect that you integrate. So in our gamified staking model, we have incentivized Web2 and Web3 players to behave in the exact same way, while incentivizing ourselves to create a fun experience. Otherwise, the Web2 players won't play. And the way in which Web2 players and Web3 players will behave given this set of incentives also is the one that VCs want them to interact, because VCs are pretty much interested in a system that naturally creates a pushing TVL pressure. So basically, that's the whole enchilada. Like, that's I know it's a little bit of a mouthful, but it's difficult to explain in a short-term version. But basically, incentive alignment and value to the player. That's where we're focusing.
Yeah, I'll keep it short because I know we need to move to the other questions. But I think you hit the nail on the head on one of the major problems in Web3 game design is, trying to figure out what the utility of the token to an extent within the game will be, but not just that. What happens, when you receive proceeds in the token? So I think one major issue a lot of people don't talk about is the fact that when you receive proceeds in a token as a project, there's a tax event. And a lot of times if your token is not super liquid, that can be a challenge because projects, are trying to create revenue models. They do ultimately want to make some money. So when you're receiving the token as a value, to you, not only do you have tax liability, but, the thing you said is it would be crazy to sell the token. I agree. I don't think that should be part of any design, but there's lots of projects that are using token proceeds and funneling that back into the market. So I think that as crazy as it might seem, there's definitely projects doing it, not necessarily to the benefit of their holders. And I think that's a different question. So I actually think it's really interesting how you guys are tackling that issue, the staking model, the basically the TVL model. Prior to today, I had really only heard of one other method of doing that, in a decentralized way, which was burning the token. I think some projects will do that, right? Take sale proceeds and send them straight to the burn contract. I think that's kind of been the typical method in the past. I like the staking model. We obviously we tackled that a little bit differently. When we sell things, they're going to essentially get locked in liquidity pools to provide secondary market liquidity for our items. So, kind of a different approach to the same issue of not receiving tokens as proceeds, instead, either, staking them or locking them in some way. And then in our case, trying to use that to provide secondary market liquidity. I guess in your case, taking them out of circulation entirely. I'm not sure. One question I had is whether you unstake and get those tokens back in exchange for the NFT, or if those NFTs simply become kind of on, if you want to get rid of it, if you want to sell it, just do it on a marketplace or on the secondary market.
You simply do it in a marketplace. I think that one big misunderstanding, I don't know if it's a misunderstanding. Well, maybe yes, but I think that the kind of profiles of people that are most attracted to blockchain commonly don't incorporate like people expert in, cultural issues like social phenomena and the sort. It's usually more people from finance or from marketing or journalism and so on. But I think that there's a cultural thing that's pretty evident, and that it's very missed in blockchain discussion when you're talking about assets, is that assets are only valuable not because of their scarcity. Assets are valuable because of their social relevance. So if you really want to make that, for example, like Counter-Strike has these weapons that are sold in the secondary market for hundreds of dollars, even though they provide zero value, zero. we have Magic the Gathering cards, which are in the tens of thousands of dollars. Why? Not because they make people any money, or maybe they make them believe that they will conserve value. Maybe some of them are doing that, but that's not the general case. The general case is people want to have things that they like, and that in that sense, I think that the best way to empower not only your in-game assets like your weapons and these NFTs that are playable, but also to empower your token is to make more socially desirable the items that your token gives access to. You know what I mean? If your token has the ability to constantly craft items that people actually want for social reasons, not because there's only 100 copies of this guy, so maybe in the next bull run, I don't know. This is not sustainable. That is not sustainable, and it's built for a player base that cannot sustain revenue, and I think that that's the problem of many games until now, that the systems are not built for scalability. And if you want to go, I think that of course this has been said infinite amount of times, is that we all want to get out to the mainstream with our tools, with our blockchain tools, but what I think that people has to be more aware of is that when you're designing a Web3 game, is that your game will only have future if you are building something that at least has the chance of being culturally and socially desirable and appreciated. So, and that lies in the art, in the game itself, in the music, in the spirit that the game evokes in the people that play it. That's where the real value comes from, even though that it's not what's most visible because we can't count it. But that's the reason why things have value. So I think that's where you have to focus.
May I offer an adjustment to the ending conclusion?
Go for it. Yeah, and then let's yeah, go for it.
I think there are two very important types of gamers: just people with time and no money, and people with no time and enough money. And it's the relationship between those two that make a lot of games today work. I think that it is about considering how to facilitate that relationship that will make games successful. I also think that nobody should be designing Web3 games. I think you should be designing games that leverage technologies to help those two groups of people interact. If you took Web3 tech and underlied it for World of Warcraft, and which can take thousands of hours, you have people that are grinding, and you have people that don't have time to grind, but they are willing to pay for the result of grinding. And right there, you have an economic system. The issue that has plagued a lot of these games in the past was game development companies get squeamish when they think about the idea that there are valuable digital assets hosted centrally on their servers. You offload that liability when you bring blockchain into the equation. So I think these are the types of things people need to consider when designing one of these games. It's to stop thinking Web3 is a thing at all, and rather an enabling technology to facilitate the desirable economic relationship that already exists between groups that are specializing in different types of resources, i.e., currency and time.
Absolutely, totally agree. I'll kick it back to Spencer to keep us going.
I'm sorry to barge in, but I think that this is so true. Like, I often, I'm just gonna give this quick. I often say to people like blockchain is simply a tool. It's just you have a match, and you can burn a house or you can cook a meal. It doesn't matter for the match. It's only the responsibility of the hand, and I completely agree with what you have just said. Blockchain is nothing but a set of tools, and what you do with that, it's up for your design and completely of your responsibility. And I absolutely agree that bridging the gap between those two groups is essential, specifically not for all games, but specifically for blockchain games, in particular because of the trustless mechanisms that allow us to lend us stuff between us. But I absolutely agree. I think this is a point that should be done more often. I love the phrase. It's very polemist from you saying blockchain doesn't exist, but I love it.
100%. No, absolutely. And great discussion on this one. I'm gonna kick it back to Spencer now, so he can take us into the next question, just because we're getting a little over time. So let's keep plugging and we'll keep going.
Absolutely. So the next question is going to go to Jay. So Arena Z supports both devs and gamers with tools like SDKs and regulatory guidance. In your experience doing this, what's been the biggest challenge in removing friction from the Web3 game development experience?
All right, so I think the most important thing is that there are a lot of so basically we deal with some of the developers that we deal with are Web3 native and more friendly with that, but most of a lot of others were more into a traditional gaming world and just transitioning into Web3. And what we tried to emphasize is that one of the biggest things that they need to realize or understand is that gamer groups are really a diverse group, regardless of whether they're from traditional gaming or Web3. So basically, even within the Web3, there are audiences who are really focused on like sustainability and visions and tokenomics, or others who are like more of a gamer than a Web3 player, and also there are others who are solely focused on earning, and so there's really diverse group of gamers and audiences in this space. And what I personally believe is that the key here is to build a really strong core user base that genuinely love the game and what the project is doing. And this is really often very tough. It often involves a lot of communication with your users and preparing the ecosystems and basically being transparent with your visions and plans, and sometimes even your mistakes. Sometimes you have to come out transparently on your mistakes and changes and really try to connect with your user base. And this sometimes can be a bit of a hurdle for the traditional developers. But I think if you go through all these, what you can really get is a very strong, engaging user base that will be sticking your game. And this is I think one of the rare things that one of the biggest strengths that you can find Web3 games as a developer, to have those strong user base. So, yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think building a core base and the fact that user bases are diverse are kind of key aspects. I think every game has to approach differently, but also something that oftentimes is uniquely Web3, in that a lot of communities and player bases get formed before the game even exists, right? And you do some sort of funding through communities. Like, the community is involved in the development. You're building in public, and that's why I think, like, what you said about transparency is so important. A lot of times we are all playing unfinished games, right? Which is a little bit different than kind of the AAA space, and what you would see in traditional gaming. So I think
Let's be honest, the AAA space is mostly unfinished games.
that's true too. Yeah. That is absolutely true. I think maybe more so in this space when you've got I've never seen, a place where you've got such an engaged community, typically from day one, probably more engaged and invested than any other niche community would be. And I think that creates an incredible opportunity to involve that community in game development, but also the potential challenge of building for a very particular type of user, and you want to avoid that as well, right? Because people are in it for different reasons, and it may not, your holder base may not be your core gamer base eventually. So I definitely agree with the statements that were made. So let's keep going, I guess, just because we're short on time. Back to you, Spencer.
Thank you, Nick. So next one's going to go to Kevin. So how does tokenized lore empower the Alien Worlds community to shape the game's universe in a meaningful way?
Oh God! All right, my inner nerd is going to come out right now. All right, for those of you that don't know, tokenized lore is the answer to Disney fucking Star Wars up. Okay, so they purchased Star Wars and then they decided what they were going to do with it, and they drove it into the ground with no questions to the community. I don't know if they did focus groups. If they did, they failed. It doesn't matter. But they were a central actor deciding what the IP, beloved by millions, would do over the course of decades. And that is fundamentally wrong because it excludes the most important actor, the fan, the consumer, the person who actually cares, that has headcanon, that goes online and will write fan fiction. These are the people that drive IP forward. Tokenized lore is the idea that a token will be used to govern the direction of the IP and to vote in what they want to be canon. And how does this actually alter the direction of the Alien Worlds metaverse? It is because when you are, we actually, let me back up. We did a survey recently of Alien Worlds explorers. Everybody in Alien Worlds is called an explorer. Um, Overwhelmingly, the thing that they wanted to see developed within the Alien Worlds metaverse was games, video games. And how do you drive forward not just video games, but really multimedia of any IP? Well, you have to have a consistent storyline. You have to have a thread that connects everything together. If you play one game and you have a story that is completely disconnected from playing another game that has a story, you're left feeling confused, maybe left out, maybe you don't want to come back. So we made tokenized lore as a way for the community to decide where the canon goes. And it was all based off a professionally developed layer between Kevin J. Anderson and myself and some other people who are extremely talented in developing sci-fi IP. So what has happened since then is we've seen over 1,000 people get involved in developing short stories or art that are imagining the expansion of the base lore that we built for Alien Worlds. And then what happens is we have galactic hubs, which is called the foundation of Alien Worlds in terms of providing financial grants and funding for game development. They are working with game developers to then build out games that use the premises that are voted in tokenized lore as fun games to play. At the end of the day, we're building a sci-fi IP from the ground up. I mean, it is, for me, it's an absolute dream. If we had some sort of voting mechanism for the most popular IPs today, I think that would be a way more exciting place to be than waiting for the next piece of slop that Marvel or Disney is going to put out besides Andor, which is fantastic. Andor is fantastic. So yeah, I love the concept. I didn't create it. It was inspired by a couple people that had written certain things, and actually concurrently there are multiple projects that are attempting the same direction. So it's been really exciting to work with the community on this and to watch it unfold in the industry.
Yeah, it's a super cool idea, and when time permits, I would love to do something like that. I think that's kind of a lore creator's dream in Web3. It's speaking for myself at least, we try to get the community involved as much as we can, but I think having a mechanism to do that more officially is super cool and provides real utility to a token or an NFT in a very meaningful way. It's kind of giving the super fans what they want, and I think if people are still sticking around the Web3 projects they believe in, they qualify as super fans because they've been, there through the ups and downs. So, it's an awesome system.
Let me add one thing, because I think it speaks to the rejection of Web3 in general. Um, there is a world building subreddit, and I personally reached out to larger community contributors on that subreddit to ask them about this concept. They couldn't get past the blockchain aspect. They basically said it has crypto, it's not okay. I don't like it. Despite this, despite all the advantages that it might offer, they could not get past it. It was pretty upsetting, for me personally. But I think it does speak to the efforts that we need to make as an industry to stop focusing on these things that not only are ineffective marketing tactics, but are in fact turning off who the people who could very well be the super users, the super creators, and you know, yeah,
Yeah,
it's tough.
I completely agree with that. It's unbelievable. I think NFT gaming made a bad name for itself in the beginning, and people had like very few incentives to get past it. So that feeling is a lot out there in Web2. It's a great point what you are making. This is something that we have studied a lot where we were preparing before starting this project, which is very young. We wanted to see like where are the pain points of the gamers out there located. So one of the origins of the gamified staking thesis is that it basically addresses some of those pain points, like the necessity of microtransactions or the necessity of battle passes to monetize for games. I've seen that a lot of Web3 gamings now that tokens have proven ineffective when simply sprinkled on top of games, like somewhat making a small step back and readopting these things from Web2. But we see the effects of that, like selling experience, and we see how Ubisoft stock actions are falling to the ground with a 40 something fall percent, 50 something percent fall during the last 6 months. And this is precisely because of how players are uncomfortable with some of the designs of the gaming. So what we tend to believe is that we have to create a virtuous relationship between the game and the blockchain in such a way that the game won't need any of those other pain points, and the quote unquote only bad thing that you have to convince the user is that it has an NFT. So if you say, well, I'm an NFT game, and you get these frowns, I know, I've seen them. It's very upsetting. I agree with you. But if you say no microtransactions, no battle passes, and also an NFT game, I think that the impact it's far more different, because I think that the pain of players that are looking to these games full of microtransactions, full of that they have to constantly buy battle passes, and if they don't, they feel like they can't compete anymore. or games that are selling experience or so on. I think that if you address to those pain points in the gameplay, you will have more acceptance in the fact that you have an NFT. If you also frame it like, how is buying an NFT any different as downloading something from Steam? Like, you buy something from Steam, you have access to a game. An NFT can be the same. So I think it's a way of organizing the narrative. But yes, I think that's also very important to discuss in general for Web3 gaming.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I remember back in 2021 going to Comic-Con and speaking to a crowd of comic book artists and enthusiasts, after coming off of working with an 87-year-old comic artist who had, never really gotten any royalties, never really made a living other than kind of getting by, working on some of the biggest IPs in history, and then having seen his.
Did you cut out, or did I lose everybody?
I
Oh,
think I
we
think
were
Nick
both.
might have cut out.
I
Yeah,
was
I think
just
he cut out.
like,
I wasn't sure if it was me or not, or
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah,
yeah. I've been having issues all space. That's why I left and came back. But
general
sounds
confusion
like it
in
was
the
Nick who
chat.
cut out. Well, in that case, I'll move us along to our final question here, just in the interest of time, which is going to go to Aaron. So, Chaspa is building a home for Web 2 and Web 3 gamers. What's your strategy for bridging both those two worlds together?
Yeah, so thank you so much for the questions. For Chaspa, we are really a fun community back then, and we have this kind of platform that makes Web 2 gamers and Web 3 gamers, like play along each other. It's because we support Web 2 and Web 3 startup games, and we also have a research platform in our website. And then, yeah, so we also have this kind of thing where every week, once per week, we have Google Meet with Web2 user, just to teach them how to, connect the MetaMask, how to play a Web3 game, explain them what is NFT. So